Can you know everything about an experience without ever experiencing it? Imagine a woman named Mary. Mary knows absolutely everything there is to know about the color red. She knows its wavelength. She knows how light behaves when it hits your eyes. She knows exactly what happens inside your brain when you see it. She knows every scientific fact, every neurological process, every detail there is to know. In fact, if you asked Mary anything about the color red, she would probably give you a better answer than anyone alive. But there is one thing Mary has never done. She has never actually seen red. Because Mary has spent her entire life inside a room where everything is black and white. And then one day, she walks outside. In front of her is a bright red apple. And for the first time in her life, Mary sees the color red. Now, here's the strange part. Did Mary just learn something new? Because if she already knew everything there was to know about red, what could she possibly have learned? The strange thing Mary discovered is there are two very different ways of answering that question. On one hand, you could say, no, Mary already knew every physical fact about color. So when she finally saw red, she did not learn a new fact. She simply gained the ability to recognize and experience something she had only known about before. But there is another way to look at it. Maybe she did learn something, because knowing that red has a certain wavelength is not the same as knowing what red actually looks like. You can explain the science of a sunset perfectly. You can describe every wavelength of light involved. But none of that tells you what it feels like to stand there and watch the sky turn orange. And that's the strange question Mary's room leaves us with. Is knowing everything about an experience the same as actually knowing the experience? And if it isn't, then maybe there are some things information alone can never give us. And that's where Mary's room stops being about color. Here's where Mary's room gets really interesting. Because you don't need to live in a black and white room to have the same problem Mary had. You do it all the time. You think you know what success will feel like, what falling in love will feel like, what freedom, failure, happiness, or even heartbreak will feel like. You build an idea of these experiences in your head before you've ever lived them, and sometimes when reality finally arrives, you discover something unexpected. Knowing what something is supposed to feel like isn't the same as actually feeling it. And that's when Mary's room stops being a thought experience about color and starts becoming a thought experiment about your life. Maybe we are all sitting in our own version of Mary's room, trying to imagine colors we have never seen. Knowing about something isn't the same as experiencing it. We do this more often than we realize. We confuse knowing about something with knowing what it's actually like. You can read 100 books about love. You can understand attraction, attachment, hormones, even the psychology behind relationships. But then you actually fall in love, and suddenly, all that knowledge feels different. The same thing happens with failure. You can understand intellectually that failure hurts, but losing something you genuinely cared about, that's something you don't understand until you've lived it. And loneliness is even stranger. You can know exactly what the word means. You can understand it perfectly, but there is a difference between knowing what loneliness is and lying awake at 3 in the morning, wishing you had someone to talk to. That's the gap Mary's room is pointing toward. The gap between knowing something from the outside and knowing what it's like from the inside. And once you notice that difference, you start seeing it everywhere. The life we imagine versus the life we actually experience. Think about the life you're working toward right now.
There's probably something you believe will change everything.
More money, a better career, the right relationship, more freedom, and somewhere in your mind, you've already imagined how you'll feel when you finally get there. You'll be happier, more confident, more at peace. But here's the problem. You've never actually been there, so you're making predictions about an experience you've never had. You're Mary, sitting in that room, trying to imagine what the color outside will look like. And sometimes we reach the thing we've spent years chasing, only to discover that the feeling we imagined was completely different from reality. Because getting what you want and feeling the way you expected to feel are two very different things. And maybe that's one of the strangest things about being human. There are things you cannot learn from a book. You can learn about almost anything. You can study love without being in love, study courage without ever being afraid, and study grief without ever losing someone. Study success without ever achieving it. You can understand the words. You can understand the psychology. You can understand every explanation someone gives you. But there is a point where explanations cannot take you any further. Imagine you've never tasted chocolate. Someone could spend hours describing its flavor. Sweet, bitter, creamy, rich. You could memorize every word, but none of those words would put the taste in your mouth. You would still have to taste it. And that's what experiential knowledge is. It's the kind of knowledge you don't simply receive, you live. But here's where it gets really strange. There's something almost unsettling about this. Every person you see has an inner world you can never fully enter. You can know their name, their story, their memories, their fear. You can listen to them describe what they are feeling. You can hold their hand when they are hurting. But you will never know exactly what their pain feels like from inside their mind. And you'll never know their happiness either. Because no matter how close you become to someone, you are still experiencing their life from outside. They are experiencing it from the inside. And maybe that's what makes consciousness so strange. We are surrounded by billions of people, but every single one of us is locked inside a first-person experience that nobody else can completely access. Suddenly, Mary's room feels a lot bigger than a room. It feels like the human condition. So what can we actually know? Maybe Mary's room isn't telling us that knowledge is useless. It's telling us that knowledge might have a boundary. There may be things we can describe completely, measure perfectly, and understand scientifically, yet still not be able to transfer the experience itself. You can explain what pain does to the brain, but you cannot send someone your pain. You can describe your happiness, but you cannot hand someone the feeling. And that leaves us with a strange possibility. Maybe reality contains part that can only be understood from the inside. And if that's true, then consciousness may be one of the few things in the universe that cannot be completely explained by describing what's happening around it. The question Mary leaves us with. Mary walks out of the room. She sees red. And in that moment, something has changed. We just don't know exactly what. Maybe she gained knowledge. Maybe she gained an ability. Maybe she simply experienced something that no amount of information could have given her. And that's why Mary's room has survived for so long. Because underneath the question about color is a much stranger question. What if some parts of reality can only be known from the inside? What if information can tell you everything about an experience, but never actually give you the experience? And if that's true, then think about every person you've ever loved. You may know almost everything about them, but you'll never experience the world from inside their consciousness. So, how much can we truly know about another human being?